If you want to buy a 7-seat SUV in Australia, you're increasingly spoilt for choice. Yes, there are your traditional options, your Nissan X-Trail, your Mitsubishi Outlander, and your Honda CR-V. But what if you're a maximum-sized family on a minimum-sized budget? Well, this is the Chery Tiggo 8 Pro Max. And I'm guessing that means that if you're a professional maximum-sized family, then this is the latest and possibly the greatest option for you. But is it? Well, that's what we're at the launch to find out. The Tiggo 8 Pro Max arrives in 3 keenly priced variants, but it's not necessarily a 7-seat price leader. See the numbers on your screen now. Those drive-away price tags make this new model more expensive than some low-cost rivals like the Mahindra XUV 700 and the LDV D90. But once you add on-road costs, it has a more affordable entry point than more mainstream rivals like the Nissan X-Trail, Mitsubishi Outlander and Honda CR-V. And like other newcomers from China, it aims to dazzle, not only with its entry price, but its strong list of features. We'll cover off the highlights quickly, but make sure to check out our full review at carsguide.com.au for the comprehensive list of features for each variant. Even the base urban grade gets 18-inch alloy wheels, LED headlights, synthetic leather interior trim, and dual 12.3-inch screens in the cabin, as well as relative luxuries like heated and ventilated front seats, a 360-degree parking camera, and wireless phone charging. The mid-grade Elite adds things like a power tailgate, a built-in dash cam and third-row air vents, while the top-spec Ultimate is the only Tiggo 8 to get all-wheel drive, a panoramic sunroof, and a 10-speaker Sony audio system. It also gets some unusual touches like a cabin fragrance system, and it can also be optioned with a brown leather interior scheme. All of that comes in at the price of something like an entry-level 7-seat CR-V, so it's impressive, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the Chery sell plenty of that Ultimate grade, as it seems the best value in the context of its rivals. The Tiggo 8 just looks like a big SUV. Of all the Chinese players in the Australian market, I think the Tiggo range is probably the most conservative. It's got those classic SUV proportions. It doesn't have too much of an outrageous grille or an LED profile, nothing that's going to turn off potential buyers. And I think that's actually going to work in its favor. In fact, I think you could put another badge on this car from pretty much any other automaker from Korea or Japan, and you probably wouldn't bat an eye at it. Inside, things get a bit more interesting. The Tiggo 8 has a very contemporary sort of dash design, complete with that similar dual screen layout that you might expect to see in a more established rival. It's also really ambitious in here. It feels as though Chery's designed this car to feel a lot more upmarket than its more entry-level rivals, and even some entry-level versions of Japanese and Korean cars. And for the most part, it really delivers. There's a lot of soft touch trims through the door here. There's some nice kind of design and pattern work through this dash and some nice pieces down here as well. Personally, I don't love this fake wood grain effect, but other than that, you could put another badge on this car and it would look the part. There are some areas where you can see through the veneer though. These two screens do look amazing, but they're a little laggy to work with, and the resolution isn't as high as it might be on a mainstream rival, for example, and that just sort of becomes noticeable as you start to play around with it a little bit more. And the dials on the digital dash, for example, have a bit of lag to them. That's a bit of a shame. But other than that, this is a pretty premium feeling space. This lifted center console really helps that, along with the digital shifter here. There's some tidy kind of buttons. There's a wireless charger under here with a slide away finish. That's kind of really nice. And USB-A and USB-C as well in this cabin. One big practicality area that I'm not such a huge fan of is this touch panel for the climate controls. I'd like it if it had dials, but you do get easy adjusts for both temperature and fan speed. It's just you kind of have to reach across and really look where you're pointing because there's no tactile feedback. And the car sure lets you know about it with its driver attention alert. When it comes to storage, you've got a big pass-through under the console here. There's some nice pockets in the doors, big enough for our 500ml bottle, which also fits nicely in this center console. And there's a large console box down here as well. Let's go have a look in the back seat. All right, in the middle row here, things are reasonably impressive, but there are some caveats. For example, this whole bench here is on a rail, so this is as far back as it goes. That's behind my own driving position. Still not bad. I got plenty of room for my knees, plenty of headroom in here. This is the top spec Ultimate with the sunroof as well. And it's a nice kind of aspect out these big windows too, and the doors open nice and wide, so it should be pretty easy to fit something like a child seat in here as well. You get a little tray in the door for storing your phone. You get a large pocket in the door which fits the 500ml bottle as well, and a further 2 more in this drop-down armrest. There's a USB-C and USB-A port on the back of the center console there, dual adjustable air vents and 2 weird little trays. You also get some buttons on this seat here where you can actually move it from the back seat, which can kind of be handy if you're needing to wrangle with that rear row or move this rail back and forward as well. Nice touches. Let's go have a look in the third row. Now, it is worth noting that the third row access latch is only on the right-hand side of the car, which is the road side, and that could leave you exposed when trying to get passengers into that rear seat. The rear row is tight. That's the position that I was sitting in before with that rail all the way back for the center row. And as you can see, my knees are hard up. Thankfully, there is somewhere for my toes to go, so they just fit under that seat there. And my head is hard up against the roof here. I wouldn't say that this is going to be a particularly comfortable space for adults, but it's probably going to be great for kids. Keep in mind, this isn't as big as something like a Kia Sorento. It is more in that kind of Nissan X-Trail mid-sizer that happens to have 7 seats. So that's why it's kind of tight in here compared to some 7-seaters. In terms of amenities, well, this is the ultimate grade, so it gets a independent fan controller for this rear row here, and there's somewhere to put my large CarsGuide bottle too on both sides, which is nice to see. There's an adjustable air vent as well, but there's no power outlets unless you reach around and get the 12-volt one that's in the boot. So yeah, look, it's not great, but for kids, it's probably fine. I thought the boot might be bigger, given this is deep in that mid-size SUV territory, but it measures short of some of its rivals, and that's likely due to the high floor needed to facilitate those extra seats. Meanwhile, space with the third row up is minimal, but perhaps passable for smaller items, and thankfully there is a space-saver spare wheel mounted outside underneath the vehicle. There's just one engine option in the Tiggo 8 range. It's a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. See the power figures for that on your screen now. No matter which variant you pick, power is channeled to the wheels via a 7-speed dual clutch automatic. And most variants are front-wheel drive, while only the Ultimate is all-wheel drive. Just for Australia, Chery made sure the Tiggo 8 is certified to tow, and it can do that up to 1,300 kilos braked or 750 kilos unbraked. The Tiggo 8 Pro Max is rated to consume 8.1 litres to 100 kilometres for front-wheel drive versions or 8.7 litres to 100 kilometres for the all-wheel drive version. It's a far cry from what you might get from a hybrid, but then you'd have to spend a lot more to get a hybrid with 7 seats. On our test loop, I stuck to an all-wheel drive Ultimate, which drank around 9.5 litres to 100 kilometres, but we'd like to get it in for a longer drive to investigate further. Unfortunately, the turbocharged engine also requires a minimum of mid-shelf 95 unleaded fuel, pushing your running costs a little higher. Okay, so Chery Tiggo 8, what's it like to drive? Well, there's some really positive surprises here because Chinese cars, well, they haven't exactly been known for their stellar driving experience in the past, but right now they're really making leaps and bounds all in the right direction. So starting with visibility, it's really excellent out of the cabin of this car. You've got these massive front windows, these massive side windows, really nice wing mirrors. It really is a bit of a glass house. It makes it feel spacious and airy too, which is nice. But there is one weird thing, and it's this rear vision mirror. It's like a really wide angle sort of vibe. And that's kind of cool because you can look in the rear vision mirror and you can see the back seat and probably your kids without having to adjust it. But because it's so wide, it's really hard to get a good feel on the distance to the car behind you. Like, I've been driving this thing for quite a bit on the test program, and it feels like people are tailgating you, and then you look in the side mirror and they're actually quite a way back. So that was a bit weird. The other thing I noticed was the steering. It's really light. And this might be great for some, especially family buyers, because it is really easy to wind the steering on and off when you're in a parking lot or doing the school drop-off or something like that. Like, this is a big SUV and it just feels really easy to steer. But when you're out on the open road, it does feel a little doughy and disconnected. So it doesn't quite have the sporty, kind of refined driving characteristics, especially in terms of the steering, that some of its rivals from Korea and Japan have. So that's worth noting as well. Power though, well, you don't want for power. This 2-litre engine just has heaps of go. We've driven both variants, and so I've spent most of my time in the Ultimate all-wheel drive, and you put your foot down and this car just surges forward. Plenty of power. It's especially rated to tow for Australia, which is nice. But the main difference between the two variants is the front-wheel drive versus all-wheel drive, because keep in mind they get the same engine and the same dual clutch automatic transmission. And so what this ends up meaning is you get all of this power delivered quite quickly in the front-wheel drive, and the front-wheel drive has a habit of sort of spinning the front wheels because there's a lot of torque. So that's surprising. It's almost too powerful for the front-wheel drive sort of setup, but on the all-wheel drive it feels pretty good. Of course, it's one thing to have plenty of power and it's another thing to deliver it in a nice, smooth manner. And it might raise a bit of a red flag for you that the Tiggo 8 has a dual clutch automatic transmission, a 7-speed dual clutch automatic transmission. And for the most part, I've found it's not the worst one I've driven. Now, that's not to say it's perfect. Chery have made a point of saying that they've worked on and tuned the software for this transmission so it doesn't have the kind of nasty characteristics that people usually associate with dual clutches. But there are still a handful of occasions when you can catch it off guard and get some of that sort of bucking movement at low speeds in traffic or at T-junctions, that sort of thing. So not perfect, but once you're rolling, it's really smooth. So clearly that tuning has had some effect. I think what stands out to me the most about this car, and what sets it apart from a lot of its rivals, particularly in this low-cost space, is how refined it is. The cabin's super quiet. From what I understand, it has acoustic glass in the front. The tyre choice seems to be pretty responsible. The engine sounds really distant. There's clearly a lot of noise filtering going on in the engine bay there. So I've been really impressed with this car, both at city speeds and at freeway speeds when it comes to the level of ambience in this cabin. And that's good because it's got this kind of all these luxury trims on the inside and it's trying to sell this more upmarket promise for such an affordable car. And then it does really match it when you're out on the open road. So yeah, not bad, and not what I expected either. Now, when it comes to the ride, there's a few interesting things to note. It is a bit soft and spongy, and so this means out on the road when you're going over undulations, it can be a little bit bouncy and maybe lose a little bit of body control. Now, keep in mind, this is for an SUV, and a lot of this car's SUV rivals have had a lot of time in the market to kind of tune that ride and make it feel sporty, make an SUV feel like you're driving a sedan. That's not quite present here. This is much more comfort focused. Yes, it's spongy. Yes, it can lose a little bit of that body control in the corners, but so long as you're not pushing it too hard, it's actually really comfortable. So as you're driving along and going over harder bumps, potholes, things like that, they're filtered out pretty well. They're filtered out better on the entry 2 cars because they get a smaller wheel, and maybe not filtered out quite as well on the top spec because it's got bigger wheels and less to soak up those bumps. So where does that leave us? I'm pretty impressed with the Tiggo 8 Pro Max. It's comfortable, it rides quite well. Yes, there are some things that could be sort of massaged out when it comes to the dual clutch transmission, and yes, it loses a little bit of body control when you're really sort of tearing up those corners, but that's not the purpose of this car. This car really is sort of meant to be that comfortable, everyday family tourer, and I think it really delivers on that front. And the fact that you can compare it to much more established rivals at all is super impressive, and I think it's a real indicator of Chinese cars moving in the right direction. So not bad at all. So one area where Chery ran into trouble when it relaunched in Australia just a year ago now is the Emotive 5, its first launch product, had some issues with its autonomous safety equipment. Now, obviously this car gets a really comprehensive list of features. Check out the full written review at carsguide.com.au if you want to see all of them, but it's got everything you need, even on the base car. But importantly, for the Tiggo 8 Pro Max, they've been tuned really nicely. I was expecting to find annoying systems, typically annoying systems that aren't just restrained to Chinese cars either. Systems that are annoying in Japanese and Korean cars and even European cars, things like lane keep assist and driver attention alert, which can really sort of be distracting and get in your face. But they've been really nicely tuned out here. I've driven several variants of this car now, and I haven't run into any trouble with the lane keep assist. The only thing that's maybe a little bit overzealous is that driver attention alert, which is ironic because you do have to sort of concentrate a little bit to operate some of the touch controls on this car. So you'll trigger that quite often while you're doing that. The Tiggo 8 Pro Max also gets 10 airbags, but it's important to note that the coverage does not appear to extend the whole way down the third row. At the time of filming, the Tiggo 8 Pro Max was yet to receive an ANCAP rating. Okay, so Chery offers 7 years of warranty, 7 years of cap price servicing, and 7 years of roadside assist. And that roadside assist comes with the caveat that you do need to service the car with Chery if you want it topped up on that yearly basis. That's a pretty robust ownership promise, and it matches a lot of its Chinese rivals. Servicing is required once every 12 months or 15,000 Ks. Pricing was still to be confirmed at the time we shot this video, but if it follows the same formula as the Tiggo 7 and the Emoto 5 before it, it will be very competitive. This 7-seat mid-size SUV space is tightly held by just a handful of nameplates, and it's easy to see how something like the Tiggo 8 Pro Max could mix things up. Yes, there are a few areas where it could use a little bit of massaging, but most of them are in the drive experience, and importantly, there's no real deal breakers or anything too weird about this car. It does feel very normal, but it's also well equipped, well priced, quite plush, and surprisingly refined on the inside as well. So if you're shopping in this space, it's definitely worth a look.